All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back into today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. So in today's episode, I want to go over the squat for athleticism, how we can build athleticism and increase our strength and our power output by using the squat as a foundational exercise, but use it in different ways. So a lot of people will think of the squat as just a lower body exercise, something that builds muscle in the legs, right? Something that you just do to look strong and to lift heavy and that type of thing. But I think that for athletes, I know for athletes, and I think for everyday athletes, I would argue that the squat, is something bigger. And it can be the difference between just being strong, but also looking strong and being powerful and being athletic, so that whenever it comes time to do the things that we love to do, that require athleticism, we have that innate ability. We have that kind of ingrained into our muscle fibers and into our neurological connections to go through those movement patterns. And so the squat, right, is a movement. It's a lower body movement. And I think of things in terms of movement patterns. And so today I want to talk about this concept that I think the one singular thing you can do to become more athletic is to squat heavy, and to squat heavy fast. Now, I'll get into how we can, think about that from a philosophy standpoint or from a programming standpoint, but I want to dive into a little bit of what I mean by those things, right? Because we can go through the movement pattern of squatting. We know what squat heavy means, but squatting heavy fast is something that a lot of you may not, fully be aware of, but doing each of those three things, checking each of those three boxes, is going to level up your athleticism in the long run. So let's get started with the squat in and of itself. First and foremost, there's a lot of people who just do not squat at all. They leg press, they do leg extensions, they may train their legs, but a lot of times people just don't like training legs. And I think that just the act of squatting in and of itself, from a movement pattern standpoint, has exponential gain long term. Now, whenever people do squat, oftentimes they don't want to go too heavy, or they want to go super, super heavy, and then they don't tap in to those high threshold motor units that require that power output and that explosiveness. And so that's where we can kind of lean on the conjugate method. And I'll talk about this because unlike linear programs that focus on just training one quality at a time, the conjugate method allows us to train both heavy and fast each and every week. So we can kind of layer those two together. And for busy people, for the everyday athletes, for dads and busy professionals, right, linear periodization just doesn't fit real life. If you miss a week, then the whole thing could fall off. So we'll talk a little bit about conjugate periodization inside of this, but I want to dive into the squat and just kind of go through that concept of squatting heavy, and squatting heavy fast. So to start off, the foundation here is squatting. Okay, so you'll know that I talk in terms of movement patterns a lot. Okay, I don't train exercises. I don't train the bench press. I train the upper body push. I don't train the lat pull down or the chin up. I train the upper body pull. Okay, so the same thing here occurs with the squat, right? We're training the squat. I'm not going to talk about straight bar, high bar, low bar, SSB bar, cambered bar, box squatting versus goblet squat. I don't want to get into all of that. There's tons of different ways to skin a cat when it comes to the different types of exercises we can choose to train the movement pattern. But ultimately, just training the movement pattern of the squat is the foundation, right? We need to be squatting. Squatting sets that foundation as one of the most functional movements that you will do for your performance, your health, and your longevity. And having the ability to squat and squat well in your 20s, 30s, 40s is going to set you up long-term and have tremendous carryover to your functional strength as a 70, 80, and 90-year-old. So think through that, right? We can touch on with bodyweight squatting. That's the easiest, simplest way to do it, okay? Most of the individuals who listen to this are not they do squat, right? So we're a little bit beyond bodyweight squatting, but just the act of bodyweight squatting, getting into that mobility, exploring that range of motion is tremendous, okay? And if we can load it with something simple, something regressed like a goblet squat, we can go split squatting, single leg stuff, we can go single leg squats, walking lunges, that type of movement pattern that is bending the knee, hinging at the hip, loading the back, there's tremendous carryover from a longevity standpoint there. And so a goblet squat done perfectly is going to be more athletic than a barbell squat done poorly. So we've got to focus on the movement quality, right? Going deep into that movement, okay? If we're training half reps, it's because there's a certain reason we're doing so. But if we're going to try to get deep and explore that end range of motion, okay? And this comes from movement literacy, right? It's teaching your body to move and move well so that we can then load it heavy. And we'll get into squatting heavy here in a second. And so if we skip just that foundational squatting, then the heavy squats that come, the fast squats that come, are already going to be sorely lacking from that. So the second layer is squatting heavy. This, when from conjugate method, terminology, is max effort work, or at least heavy submaximal work, right? The standard that I use is that an athlete should be able to squat right around twice their body weight, okay? 2 times your body weight. If you're an everyday athlete, that should be your standard. That should be your target. Now, I understand that not everyone is going to hit that. Not everyone wants to hit that. Not everyone needs to hit that. But that's kind of that, general guideline. If I'm working with someone and they say, well, how heavy should I be squatting? I'm going to say, let's get you to a 2 times per week, 2 times per body weight on the bar. And let's get that for at least 1. Okay. And 2 times per body weight is not some random number. Okay. I didn't just pick that out of a hat. I've worked with clients, I've worked with athletes, and the research also backs this up, that 2 times body weight squat really strongly correlates with sprint and jump performance. And that studies consistently show that once athletes reach around that 2 times per body weight squat, then strength gains begin to, consistently have smaller transfer to sprint and jump performance. And so what we're trying to do is get strong enough, but we don't need to squat 2.5 times body weight. We don't need to squat 3 times per body weight. If you're a power lifter and you're competing and squatting super, super heavy is, obviously important to your competition, or if you play football and you're a lineman, right, squatting there beyond 2 times per body weight, 2 times body weight is going to be more important for you. But the general everyday athlete, that target should be about 1.9, 1.8 to 2 times body weight to get the max benefits out of this. Now, 2 times body weight is kind of that line, right, where strength starts to become athletic. That's why we need to get there, because now we can produce enough force. We're strong enough to be able to move the weight, and we need to get, obviously now move it fast, okay? So beyond 2 times body weight, then the returns start to diminish, okay? Unless you're a power lifter again, then the juice just really isn't worth the squeeze when it comes to getting stronger just for the sake of getting stronger. So now the next layer, right? This is dynamic effort. This is squatting heavy fast. Now, I don't mean you got to load it up with that 2 times body weight, on the bar and go as fast as you can with poor technique. That's not what this means at all, right? But squatting heavy, there is some numbers behind this, okay? And I'll kind of talk about that here. But we've got this foundational strength. We're strong. We can move the bar. We can move the load. But speed and power is what separates that athleticism, right? That's where that separation starts to increase. We're now becoming more athletic. We're now becoming more powerful. We now can jump higher, and we can sprint faster. So we don't just want to be strong, but we want to be strong fast. We want to be explosive and able to produce and tap into that, those high threshold motor units to really move that load at a high velocity. Okay, so that's the key here. And this is where dynamic effort in the conjugate method really comes into play, because now we're squatting with a relatively heavy load and we're doing so fast. So general guidelines are all over the place, but we'll think like 30 to 60% of your max. We may even go up to 70% of max, and we're going to try to move that as fast as possible. A goal that I set, for myself and for a lot of my clients who really take this, into consideration, is we want to squat about 1 to 1.5 times body weight at roughly a meter per second. So I, from time to time, I will throw a bar speed tracker on the bar, and I'll track my velocities using velocity-based training. And that's kind of the goal that I'm looking to get at. I want to move that weight beyond a meter per second, which is fast. That bar is flying. Okay. So once we've got this raw strength, now we can couple it with the speed and the power and the dynamic effort of that movement to be able to move that weight extremely fast. And that trains rate of force development, right? How quickly can we tap into those fibers? How quickly can we tap into that strength? Okay. And that, again, is that separator of what just makes someone strong or what just makes someone a lifter or a weightlifter or an exerciser, right? To becoming more athletic. Okay. This speed and this power is a big separator from those two. So this is where conjugate really fits in. And I've already talked about it, right? But conjugate works so nice because we're training max effort and we're training dynamic effort every single week throughout that. And a lot of the programs, you'll see it either a Monday is that heavy max effort or at least heavy submaximal squat day. And then Fridays or, maybe a Thursday, depending on the layout of the program, the split, that's that dynamic effort. That's where we're moving that weight super fast, with decent amount of weight on the bar. And a lot of times we'll use accommodating resistance, which is a topic for another episode. But we're trying to put some weight on the bar. So we're not just lifting super light weight super fast, but we want to be fast and explosive with a relatively heavy weight. And now conjugate works because it lets us train both of those ends of the spectrum, right? We get that max strength, we get that speed strength, and we're training them at the same time throughout the same week. On the converse, right, linear periodization, which is what a lot of people will follow, does not allow us to do so in the same manner, right? Linear periodization assumes that your life is perfect, assumes you're never going to miss a week, you're never going to miss sessions, and your progression is always going to be linear, right? You're always going to stay on track. But everyday athletes don't need peaking cycles. They don't need to build up from hypertrophy to strength to peaking, right? They need that sustainable development across multiple qualities throughout the year, okay? Throughout time. And so that's why conjugate works so well, because it does fit and it does mold with your real life. And the literature does support this, okay? Studies comparing concurrent and undulating, programming, they show equal or even sometimes better strength and power development with concurrent than linear. And so, right, there's a decent amount of evidence that does support conjugate's multi-quality approach. So what does this look like practically, okay? If you're a beginner, let's just start with moving some weight in the squat, okay? We don't need to lift super heavy, but let's try a goblet squat. Let's get moving with some weight and some load to be able to start to build the fibers and build the muscle and build the neural connections and the strength that's needed to move through that pattern, okay? If you're more intermediate, but you don't have the strength, maybe you're coming from a hybrid background and you love to run, you're getting into lifting, right? Let's start to work on getting you strong, okay? You don't need to hit that 2 times body weight target, but let's try to get close. Let's at least build some base strength to allow us to have that carry over into the other activities and the other sports, the other things that we're trying to do, okay? Once you hit that 2 times body weight, now let's move fast. Now let's put your body weight on the bar and let's try to move it at a meter per second. Let's just move it as super fast through that range of motion as we possibly can, okay? As I talked about from a programming perspective, generally in my programs, I like to have Monday be the heavy lower body day. So we're going to usually box squat with a straight bar, with an SSB, with a cambered bar. And then on Fridays, that's our speed. So we'll do, right, 8 to 10 to 12 sets of like 2 reps, maybe 3 reps, depending on the season. And we're going to do every single one of those reps as fast as possible. Okay. And using about 50 to 60 pounds on the bar. Sometimes we'll lower that a little bit on the bar and we'll add bands or we might add chains to allow for that accommodating resistance through the full range of motion. But we want to move the weight. The goal, nonetheless, is with heavy intent. We want to go fast and explosive through that full range of motion. And the key with all of this is that you're not chasing loads. We're not trying to get as strong as humanly possible. We're not trying to lift 600 or 700 pounds. We want to use that intent. How much intention can we put into the movement to get the weight on the bar to be able to lift it heavy or to be able to explode through the full range of motion using the dynamic effort day? So if it's max effort, we need to strain. Okay, we need to be able to struggle a little bit with that weight. That doesn't mean we need to fail, but we need to at least strain through the movement. If it's dynamic effort day, now we're going to move with speed. Okay. So the formula, end of the day, is make sure you're squatting. Make sure you squat a little bit every once in a while, squat heavy, and every once in a while we're squatting fast, okay? And do this inside of a system like conjugate periodization so that it allows you to train these at the same time. You can train them every single week. You can train them at least a couple times a month, and you're building these qualities and maintaining these qualities over the course of your life versus, peaking and trying to just hit them at a certain point in time throughout the year. Okay. So strength is that foundation. Speed is the separator. And if you're going to build both, then that's where that athleticism and that, needed functional athleticism that's needed for everyday life is going to live. So if you want to see how I program that, you can check out the Peak Performance and the Peak 3X programs. I build all my programs on this philosophy. Okay. We need to lift heavy. We need to lift fast, but we also need to do so in a sustainable manner that allows us to have that longevity throughout our life. So if you want to get strong, lean, and athletic without wasting time, just go ahead and check those out because they are programmed inside those programs. So thank you for tuning in to the Everyday Strength Podcast, and I will catch you next time.